The newspapers would not print it. Between 1847 and 1852, 3 families on the limestone bluffs of the Tennessee River collapsed so completely that judges sealed the ledgers and letters that might have explained why. 23 people died, some of fever, some in accidents that made no practical sense, and some in ways a county coroner, short on courage and words, called unnatural cessation of vital functions. In the lines that survived the fire of censorship, a single name threads through inventories, bills of sale, and testimonies given in rooms where shutters were drawn against daylight. Rachel. She arrived as a bargain no gentleman should have trusted. In April of 1847, Samuel Rutledge, new money from South Carolina, lacquered over with old connections, paused in Mobile for an estate sale. He wanted an ornament that could also work, a literate house servant to instruct his daughter in French and stitch fine hems. The ledger listed Rachel, about 24, house-trained, literate, needlework and music, French and English. A notation in tight clerk's hand required that the purchaser remove her at least 100 miles from Mobile. $400, far below the price a skilled house servant could command, closed the matter. The auctioneer called the distance clause a technicality. Samuel wanted to believe him. 3 weeks later, under the high white glare of a limestone county afternoon, Rachel stepped onto the gravel at Fairmont. She was tall, with a light brown complexion and an ease of carriage no purchase can confer. She spoke gently when addressed, moved through the house as if the rooms had explained themselves to her in the long hours of the wagon road, and was useful immediately, exactly, unarguably useful. Catherine Rutledge, who prized refinement the way misers prize coins, approved of her French and her hands. 19-year-old Lydia loved the music first and the conversation after. For 6 weeks the household softened around Rachel. Dinners were served hotter, linen returned whiter, tempers held a beat longer before breaking. Then, in June, the air changed. Lydia and Rachel began to speak in corners and fall silent when others approached. The kitchen's hum lowered into watchfulness. Bess, the cook, told anyone who would listen that she had seen a woman like this in Mobile once, and that families had come apart around her like rope cut strand by strand. Most people told Bess to hush. The hush was habit more than argument. Rachel did not pry. She asked after prices cotton last week, and this, which planters paid quick and which paid late, which sons drank, which daughters were courted, which mortgages were signed with a hand that shook. A question meant nothing by itself, but 100, carefully chosen and answered by people who did not know they were speaking, built a map. The night the oak split under storm, Samuel sat over accounts that told him what he already felt in the stiff weight between his eyes. He had wagered too often on cards and cotton. Rachel set a cup by his hand and turned to go, then paused as if courtesy had wrestled with temerity and lost. "Sir, if I may," she said, eyes on the ledger's spine. "When I was in Mobile, I served a family that dealt with Mr. Haverhill's brother. There are matters you might wish to know." She named speculations and partners, dates and amounts. Samuel should have wondered how a house servant came by such particulars. He did not. Desperation loves a door, even when it knows the hall is cursed. Within a week, he used what she'd given him to corner Magistrate James Haverhill into a partnership extortion dressed in commerce and cologne. Rachel received the news with a modesty Samuel mistook for loyalty. She did not say that her sources were not white drawing rooms in Mobile, but the invisible roads along which enslaved people ferried gossip like contraband roads that ran from springhouse to smokehouse to steamboat wharf, roads no white man traveled and every white household depended upon. By August, she was indispensable. To Catherine, she was accomplishment, to Samuel solution, to Lydia confidant. With Lydia, her lessons turned from verbs to vantage. She spoke of women and property, how a daughter could be conveyed across a ledger nearly as easily as a woman in chains, how obedience and gratitude, repeated often enough, make a kind of gag. She told Lydia softly, as if reluctant to say it, that her father had begun a negotiation with the Crenshaw boy. She made the boy more reckless than he was. She made the letters in Samuel's desk more binding than they were. She did not lie so much as lean. "Love is not a consideration in these arrangements," she said one warm afternoon, the cicadas sawing the light to ribbons. "You are inventory, Miss Lydia. Valuable inventory, but inventory. You and I are not so different." On the 18th of September, Lydia vanished and left a note braided with words she had not used before: rights and self-determination, and the certainty that her life belonged to her. The county drank the news like whiskey. Search parties scoured the river. Catherine folded under the weight of a grief that could find no wall to lean on. Samuel cursed and spent like a man sweeping coins from a burning desk. Rachel wept with a completeness that satisfied even the suspicious. No one asked how the girl slipped past riders and dogs. No one knew Rachel had already hired the road hands in town who owed favors, women who remembered a kindness, men who carried letters for a price. In the quiet that followed the shouting, Daniel Crenshaw came to call. Oak Ridge lay 5 miles upriver, a plantation shorn of frills and governed by his temperate arithmetic. He noticed efficiency like other men notice beauty. Within a week, Rachel had been sold to him for $900, a tidy profit Samuel needed, and a mistake Daniel would never admit, even after it ended him. At Oak Ridge, she put aside the silk of Fairmont and put on plain competence. She mastered accounts, found savings in barrels and harness, and could speak cotton futures with a coolness that made Daniel lean forward despite himself. His daughter, Margaret, practical, watchful, imprecisely kind, watched Rachel in return. She saw how the woman listened more than she spoke, how her questions read like steps in a proof. She took her concern to her father, who dismissed it as a young woman's jealousy sharpened by the novelty of displacement. The weakness at Oak Ridge did not live in vanity. It lived in the columns, the small recurring loans that indicate a man trying to be 2 sizes richer than he is. In December, Rachel deciphered Daniel's plan, the bottomland he meant to buy, the debt he believed the river and cotton would carry. She did not act. Not yet. You can topple a tall stack with one finger, but only if you are patient enough to let the bottom loosen. Haverhill arrived in January, hungry and smiling. He offered Daniel a factoring partnership on terms generous enough to smell of desperation. Rachel poured coffee and studied the dust on the man's boots and the way his fingers worried the brim of his hat when Daniel looked away. When the magistrate left, she quietly warned Daniel against him, reversing the story she had told at Fairmont months before. No one compared versions. Their hatred served as solvent. She pulled a hidden thread, and the 3 families tangled. Then she reached deeper. William Crenshaw Steady, second son, equipped with all his father's measured virtues, had fallen in love where he should not. Rachel found out in the hum between lamplight and dawn, in partial confidences and the accidental confidence of letters. She contrived a discovery that felt like chance and watched the resulting thunderstorm wreck the house. William was married already. A child quickened. His father disinherited him with words that could not be taken back. The family lost its balance. Rachel did not smile, not where anyone could see, but the line of her mouth said she had turned the knife and liked the feel of the handle in her palm. Pressure ripened into crisis when a creditor's man from New Orleans, legitimate, brisk, and summoned by a rumor placed in the right ear, arrived demanding $8,000 Daniel did not have. Daniel chose the remedy planters choose when they will not sell land. He sold people. 20 souls were pulled up by the roots on a March morning and parceled out to buyers who spoke of profit as if it were weather. In the yard, as children learned the physics of separation, Margaret looked once at Rachel and saw, for a flicker, calculation cold as iron under snow. That night she confronted her. "I know what you are." Rachel, whose foresight included even this conversation, offered Margaret a truth, too large to swallow and too well made to spit out. "To prove me," she said quietly, "you must prove that property outwitted you. You must tell this county you were ruined by a woman you say has no power." There was no court for that. The law had been written to prevent such a case from existing. By summer, the pattern showed through even the thick weave of denial. Haverhill petitioned the court to remove Rachel as dangerous property. The judge refused. Intelligence, he noted dryly in chambers, was not yet a crime. So Haverhill hired nightmen. Rachel anticipated them. The enslaved men at Oak Ridge met them with tools turned to weapons, and the magistrate found himself arrested for attempted theft of Daniel's property. In the perverse logic of the place, the only victim recognized by law was the woman who had engineered the entire calamity. While the county argued over precedence and bad taste, the smallest and most dangerous change happened quietest. Samuel Crenshaw, youngest of Daniel's children, came to love Rachel. She did not need to seduce him. She needed only to be fully human in a house that pretended she was not. He wanted to rescue what the law insisted could not be rescued. That desire was the hinge on which her last plan swung. In late October, she told him a lie he rushed to believe. Men loyal to Haverhill would come again, and this time they would not fail. He made a plan worthy of a novel and doomed by its context. He gathered maps and food, practiced routes in his head, arranged encouragement in town. On the 3rd of November, Rachel betrayed him with the same thoroughness with which she had brought him to love her. She placed his letters on Daniel's desk like a surgeon laying out instruments. When father and son faced one another, all the words between them were dull and useless. Daniel had Samuel committed to a private asylum near Tuscaloosa by noon the next day, and sold Rachel, in a fury that felt like virtue, by the end of the week. Chained in a coffle, Rachel turned her face once toward Oak Ridge and said evenly, "Everything I did, you made necessary." The men driving the line heard insolence. Margaret, on the porch with her hands wide around the rail, heard judgment. If the county believed that wagon wheels rolling toward Mississippi would crush the story flat, it misjudged the weight it carried. 15 days after Rachel left Limestone County, a shot cracked the quiet at Riverside. They found Magistrate Haverhill in his study, pistol fallen from his slack hand, a note on the desk that said despair without saying it. The door was locked from within. The coroner wrote the word suicide and went home to dinner. His widow did not believe it. She hired a man from Huntsville, Abraham Cornwall, who made a profession of noticing what others stepped over. Cornwall listened to everyone who would talk, and some who would not. In December, he wrote what the county already felt in its bones. A woman called Rachel had destroyed 5 households in as many years by handing people the truths most likely to undo them. She had spilled no poison. She had fired no shot. She had used the small range of agency the law allowed her and made it large by choosing her moments with a mathematician's appetite. As to the death at Riverside, Cornwall would not or could not say murder. But he described a design, grief broken down to its working parts, a study of habit, a door locked from the inside for reasons other than narrative neatness. Judge Peyton read the report and asked, not unkindly, by what statute? No one had an answer that would hold in daylight. In January, Daniel died in the gin house. The machine does not start itself, Margaret thought, and yet the sheriff, exhausted by a year that kept refusing to resolve, wrote down accident. The former field hand who had come with a message the same afternoon vanished, as if the earth had agreed to swallow him to keep the story interesting. The trader in Mississippi denied sending anyone. Everyone denied everything that would have required the law to learn a new verb. Samuel hanged himself in the asylum on the 2nd day of May. 3 weeks later, the law, slow, embarrassed, invented an offense for which it had no vocabulary: seditious manipulation by enslaved persons. It sounded like a sermon and worked like a scarecrow. Planters liked to see it in their fields, but the crows flew as they pleased. By then, Margaret Crenshaw had decided to trade the decencies of revenge for its practicalities. She carried a pistol and her father's anger to Texas, where Cornwall had traced Rachel. She arrived to learn that Rachel had been sold again and again, a stone skipping east over the map, and was now in the hands of a widow near Lake Pontchartrain, a woman whose maiden name pulled the circle tight. Elise Delacroix received Margaret in a room where the lake's light climbed the wallpaper like breath. When Rachel entered, she did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had considered every possible ending and found very few of them interesting. "You will not shoot me," she said. "Not as a dare, but as a diagnosis." "Not yet." Elise spoke first. Her husband, Louis Delacroix, had been among the first ruins Rachel left, and she had purchased Rachel not to command, but to understand. For 3 weeks, she had set paper and ink before the woman and asked for a complete account. She now laid 80 pages on the table, a document capable of setting a legislature on fire and leaving it smoking with its own contradictions. Margaret asked why. Rachel began in Richmond, the city where she had been born free, into a house with books and music, and a father who taught the dignity of good work. Debt and malice had reached into that life and named mother and daughter property. Slavery did not merely enchain, she explained. It argued over and over against the very idea that the enslaved mind could be equal to the master's. So she fought with the weapon the law could not confiscate. She watched. She learned. She turned truth into a blade and cut where the blood would be slowest and most public. I did not make your fathers gamblers or overreachers, she said. I did not invent the habits that ruined them. I timed the revelations. I selected the ears. I built situations in which the worst version of their character would seem like the most sensible course. And the deaths? Margaret's voice had honed itself to a point by the time it reached the question. Do not wrap them in philosophy. Rachel did not. Daniel, she said, had made enemies, as all men do, when money is tight and pride is full. She had ensured that those enemies knew where he would be and when. She had ensured the door would be unlocked by circumstance, if not by hand. She had done nothing the law could lift, and yet he had died exactly as she needed him to, alone, in a story that looked like accident, unless you pulled back far enough to see how the lines converged. As for your brother, she added, and at last her voice thinned, that was a miscalculation. I broke him because he believed he could undo me with love. I did not intend to break him beyond repair. Regrettable, Margaret said, and the word felt obscene coming out of her. She drew the pistol and kept it steady. Elise did not move. Rachel did not beg. Shoot me, Rachel said, and you restore what your world believes about the other kind of people, that we must be silenced to keep you safe. Spare me, and you admit something harder, that you cannot punish the intelligence your laws deny we possess. Either way, the system that made both of us owner and owned is on trial, not only me. Margaret lowered the gun because she wanted the paper more than the shot. She carried the confession back across state lines like contraband. The legislature in Montgomery argued itself into a statute no one respected. Newspapers made sure certain phrases did not reach print. Rumor, which cannot be subpoenaed, did the rest. Rachel vanished from records around 1,850. Perhaps she died. Perhaps she escaped. Perhaps she changed names and taught another woman how to listen, how to wait. The family she touched did not recover in any tidy way. Samuel Rutledge died in 1853, tired of his own story. Lydia was found in Ohio, living under a maiden name, and a real one she would not speak. Margaret Haverhill remarried and insisted on a home without lockable studies. Margaret Crenshaw, who could have been a wife and hostess if the century had not put other tasks in her hands, remained with the remnants of Oak Ridge and wrote, in 1867, a sentence I can only repeat. I find that I almost admire her even as I hate her. She was the enemy, and she won. Years later, scholars, the sort who trust paper more than rumor, were allowed to see a few pages of the confession before it disappeared again into a box labeled with a number instead of a name. One passage survives in classrooms and arguments, the part where Rachel explains why she chose to break houses instead of necks. I could have poisoned men or cut their throats in sleep. Many did and were hanged, and nothing changed but the names on the door. I wanted the doors themselves to come off their hinges. I wanted the people who called us property to fear our minds more than our hands. They can chain hands. In the river country, the cotton kept growing a while longer, and men kept counting bales, and women kept holding houses together with thread and will. And sometimes, when the wind came down the long fields just right, the oak that had split that first night creaked a sound like laughter, or warning, or both.